who walked the Trail of Tears, a man dubbed Cow Tom by his former owner, a Creek chief. Like countless Native Americans, Cow Tom made that long, dangerous trek before he ultimately rose to leadership within the Creek Nation. In fact, it was Cow Tom who kept my friend's Creek identity intact when he negotiated an 1866 treaty with the U.S. government, an agreement that included citizenship rights for all Black people within the Creek Nation, whether slave, adopted, or free. It may seem odd that a son of Jamaican parents would find his way inside American history, especially inside the history of Black people about whom you've likely never heard in a state you've likely never visited. Like all history, how it started wasn't how anyone expected it to end. One day in 2019, I was sitting in the New York office of the British newspaper The Guardian. I had worked there as a writer for 4 or 5 months. On this day, I was jostling between empty rooms and unoccupied desks while more senior writers and editors went to meetings, lunches, and vacations. I had no story on the books, and my editor and I had a meeting soon to figure out what I'd write next. I sat at my computer and typed www.tulsaworld.com into my web browser, not because I was looking for inspiration, but because I wanted a reminder that people could cover news and write stories about places and people most of the world didn't care about. What came up across the top of the Tulsa World's homepage were familiar faces and a story that claimed that the Black people in the accompanying picture had been members of a nation that wasn't the United States and had freedom that their ancestors had given them in the Creek Nation, but not in the United States. I was intrigued and called some friends I grew up with, many of whom had told me when we were kids that they were part Indian. I knew I had a story, but I didn't realize that the piece I'd eventually write for The Guardian would lead me on a journey that reconfigured my notions of identity, race, and belonging. Looking back, it's odd that I wrote a story about Oklahoma, a place I wanted to forget, and a state whose mere mention often prompted any friend from anywhere else to ask, "Where is Oklahoma again?" In telling you about the place that became my home, I can tell you about America and how America fashions its identity. And if the story has shown me anything, it's that there's nothing simple about who you are or where you come from. Like the people on the front page of the Tulsa World, descendants of Cow Tom and other Black citizens of the Creek Nation, we are all beautifully complex. And there's nothing more American than struggling to fit all that complexity into boxes you did not create in the first place. We often forget who we are because we have never been given the chance to remember properly. The anti-lynching memorial at the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, offers a radical chance to remember not just the highlights of the civil rights movement, but also the true pain and brutality of our nation's past. Such painful remembering of the violence that white people perpetrated against Black people is required before we can build true racial reconciliation. Remembering with eyes wide open, I believe, is the first step to living out our moral obligations today. The fact that my classmates and I in Tulsa in the late 20th century didn't understand where we came from wasn't just bad schooling. It was the result of a deliberate attempt to prevent us from remembering, which is another way of saying that from an early age, Black people were stopped from working to change a world that had been built on racialized, violent foundations. But what if we did know? What if we all knew about this story? Knowing this history would make the truth clearer. We'd know, for example, that Tulsa's struggles over land use, development, and zoning mask a larger story, one where city planners deliberately designed the city to ensure that different non-white populations would compete with one another instead of banding together to push back against the white ruling class. We'd know that the Cherokee people have as much right to seat a representative in Congress as do Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. And they have this right based on signed treaties with the U.S. government, which the government has chosen to ignore. We'd know that the Black members of the Creek Nation who were ejected from the tribe in 1979 should be reinstated into their political homeland.